Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's operator training. I'm Hannah Hickam, the executive assistant, and I'll be your host for today. We're going to give it about 5 minutes to let folks jump on, and then we'll start off the meeting with John Axelson, and with the announcements, and yes, never mind. And then we'll get started with John Axelson and the pathway to groundwater. Thanks. For those of you just joining us, we're just giving some time for folks to get on. I'll make an announcement right at 9:05, and then we'll get started on the agenda. All right, it looks like the participants have leveled off, so I'll go ahead with the announcement. It's not a big deal or anything. We are just going to change a little bit the way that we've been doing things. Instead of having a Q&A at the beginning and the end, we're just going to have it at the end. But we encourage everybody to keep typing in their questions as they pop into your minds so that we can be analyzing them and getting you the best possible answers at the end of the show. So thank you so much for doing that, and keep on doing that. And we will move on right into the next item, which is the pathway to groundwater with John Axelson. In just a moment for me to make that transition. There it is. All right, John, can you unmute yourself? And oh, you know what? I forgot to make you a host, so that's on me. There you go, John.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Take it away.
Thanks, Hannah. Good morning, everybody. John Axelson, I'm the East Environmental Supervisor. I'm going to talk about Rule 915A today, which is soil concentrations and specifically the determination of pathway to groundwater. So next slide, please, Hannah. So the topics, talk a little bit about the background and purpose. We're going to cover what is the residential soil screening levels versus the groundwater screening levels, the data requirements needed to make a determination on what soil screening levels apply at a site, and then I'll wrap it up with some important takeaways to remember. So next slide, please. So this is a portion of table 915-1 that provides our cleanup standards. It shows the two soil concentration columns. On the left, you have the residential soil screening levels, which are the least stringent, and the protection of groundwater soil screening levels on the right, which are the most protective. And you can see that the residential levels are quite a bit higher than the protection of groundwater standards. This presentation will provide an understanding of how COGCC will determine and apply these soil standards to spills and remediation projects. So next slide, please. So a little on the background. As stated, table 915-1 refers to the two potential cleanup concentrations for both organics and metals in soil. For residential, the resident is assumed to be exposed to contaminants by the following pathways: incidental ingestion of soil, dermal contact with soil, inhalation of volatiles, and fugitive dust. And if you really want to get into more of the details, we covered a lot of the background and how we arrived at these cleanup levels during the rulemaking, and there's pretty nice write-up in the statement of basis and purpose on page 160. And also a link in this slide that will take you to the EPA regional screening level user guide if you really want to delve into it more. Next slide, please. So the groundwater screening levels. EPA developed the soil to groundwater scenario to identify concentrations that have the potential to contaminate groundwater above risk-based levels or maximum contaminant levels. EPA calculated the screening levels that are protective of groundwater using very conservative assumptions. Therefore, the groundwater protection screening levels are conservative of all cases of contamination, protect groundwater from soil contamination. So COGCC assumes there's a pathway to groundwater present at all spill and release and remediation sites until the operator provides site-specific evidence documenting that the pathway does not exist. The complexity of this evidence will vary depending on the spill release scenario and site setting. So groundwater protection screening levels are secondary to actual groundwater data. So this is an important point. The operator can sample groundwater and provide data to demonstrate that groundwater is not impacted. And this proves that the pathway to groundwater has not been completed. And so you could potentially at that point use the residential soil screening levels as your cleanup standards. And I should say, one or the other standard's always going to apply. So if there's not a pathway to groundwater, you're always going to end up still having to clean up to the concentrations in the residential screening level column. Next slide, please, Hannah. So this slide presents some of the data considerations that the operator is going to need to provide and what we will look at to try to make the determination of what cleanup standards are appropriate. So the nature and extent of the spill is always important. Was it a historic long-term release versus, a surface spill that was discovered immediately and able to be cleaned up before there's much migration into the subsurface. We're going to look at site-specific hydrogeology. Do we have fine-grained material versus coarse-grained? Are there gradations? So are there confining clay layers? And are there structures that could potentially cause migration of contaminants? So we always require the vertical and horizontal extent of the contamination in soil and groundwater to be defined. And when you're defining extent in the soil, you always need to use the groundwater screening levels as the levels that you're defining to. And there are some exceptions. Again, if you have a small surface spill or a spill inside secondary containment, we might just jump to the residential screening levels in those cases. So defining the extent doesn't mean you always have to remove to those levels. So again, if pathway to groundwater hasn't been completed, you could potentially use the higher residential screening levels. So the depth to groundwater is important. We want to know the site-specific depth from the surface. And then it's also very important to know what's the distance between the lowest soil impact or the deepest soil impact to the top of the saturated level or the water table. So the right combination above may allow operator to achieve no further action determination with residual soil impacts in exceedance of the groundwater protection screening levels. And as always, you know, there can be many scenarios for spills and releases. So it's important to work directly with your environmental protection specialist on these sites. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that we've included in our guidance document. It's a site conceptual model for a spill or a release. And it's a way that you could evaluate if you're going to need to use residential screening levels or pathway to groundwater screening levels. And in this case, you know, the scenario might be that an AST has leaked from the bottom. So maybe it was a long-term subsurface release. It impacted quite a bit of material shown by the black area. In these cases, often the operator will come in, excavate the most obviously impacted material. At some point, they might want to try to determine where they're at with the cleanup. Maybe they're not seeing staining and their field screening's not indicating the presence of contaminants, so they collect some soil samples. In this case, they've collected samples illustrated by the green stars and the red stars. The green stars are compliant with the groundwater screening level concentrations, so they're in good shape. However, they still have a couple confirmation samples that exceeded the groundwater screening level standards. So in that case, there's still an unknown as far as the vertical extent of the contamination. The operator is going to have to do some more work to either remove those impacts or do some more delineation. So in this case, we're illustrating that they've done some soil borings. They've completed a couple monitoring wells here, gone down to the water table. And this is where I was explaining that if you can sample the groundwater and say in this case that groundwater is not impacted. So the groundwater samples are analyzed by a lab. The results indicate no contaminants of concern above table 915-1 standards or above the Reg 41 standards. And so you can demonstrate that the pathway to groundwater has not been completed. And so in this case, if the red star sample locations were above the groundwater screening level, but they were below the residential screening level, the operator might be done with the soil cleanup in this case. And then obviously, if they found that groundwater was impacted, that means that the pathway was completed and the soil cleanup needs to be done to the groundwater screening levels. And Go ahead to the next slide, Hannah. So just some important takeaways to remember. The first is that the COGCC Environmental Protection Specialist will make the determination on which soil concentrations are appropriate based on site characterization data provided by the operator. Second, for purposes of delineating soil impacts, use the protection of groundwater soil screening level concentrations. So until you've met those concentrations or you're less than those concentrations, the delineation really isn't done yet. Third, the protection of groundwater soil screening level concentrations are secondary to the actual measured concentrations in groundwater. And last, and this is kind of obvious and goes without saying, but we've already had some debates on specific sites about this, but if groundwater is impacted, the pathway to groundwater is considered to be completed, and the protection of groundwater soil screening level concentrations will apply to that site. And so we did just post the guidance document for this. If you work in the environmental cleanup area, please take a look at that guidance document. We've provided 3 or 4 examples of spill scenarios. And then if you have some questions, you can come back to us next week. We'll have somebody here to answer those questions. And obviously, at the conclusion of this training, we can take any questions you might have. So thank you for your time.
Great job. Thanks, John. And we'll take questions at the end. So we'll just move straight through to the next agenda item, which is environmental form submittal timing with Greg Duranlo. Give me just a moment to pull that up. There we go. All right, Greg, take it away.
Thank you, Hannah. Good morning, everyone. Greg Duranlo, Environmental Manager. First, I just want to say that this will take longer than the 5 minutes that are on the agenda, but hopefully it won't take too long this morning. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about some spill and remediation reporting requirements. It's not quite just timing. The first slide here addresses questions that we've gotten from numerous operators about the requirements for supplemental information on a Form 19 supplemental. Rule 912B4B requires, as stated here, all pertinent information not previously provided, including photo documentation of the source, the impacted area, and the initial cleanup area. So, really this just points to the fact that, as soon as you have a spill, you should be thinking about photo documenting, your initial response actions, et cetera. Take pictures as soon as you know there's a spill. As we used to advise our teams when I was an environmental consultant, if you didn't take a picture of it, it didn't happen. So, have your guys, whether it's your consultant, your pumper, your contractors out there, have them taking pictures of the spills. Next slide, please. So spill closure requirements, we are trying to get spills closed in a timely manner. It benefits the state of Colorado, it benefits the individual operators. We don't want spills lingering, and having sites, assets transferred from one operator to another and a spill still being open. We want to try and eliminate that going forward. So we have now set a 3-month, 90-day sort of timeline to get a spill closed. So within 90 days of discovery of the spill, you're required to submit a Form 19 supplemental that demonstrates compliance with 915.1 or and request closure. If your site can't meet the Table 915.1 standards after 90 days, then you're required to submit a Form 27 initial to continue the investigation and remediation under an approved work plan. And with that Form 27, you would also be submitting a 19 requesting closure. And I think most operators are familiar with how to do that. You reference the Form 27 in that 19, and you say that, you know, the cleanup is going to continue under this, under the other project. And I guess the timing of that is such that our staff will receive both of those forms, and we will approve the Form 27 to carry the remediation forward, and then we will actually enter the project number into the Form 19 when we approve that to close that spill. So this just prevents the open spills from lingering. The Form 27 also establishes an implementation schedule, and it really does encourage operators to actively and specifically address the source remediation. And so for all open spills that were active and open prior to January 15th, 2021, when the rules went into place, by April 15th, 90 days after that date, all open spills need to be in compliance with this rule. So we're expecting a Form 19 supplemental or a Form 27 to come in for all those open spills. And we understand that this is a big list, and it's a big lift. Next slide, please. So moving on to the site investigation, remediation, and closure, Rule 913. Each Form 27 will now establish a specific site-specific implementation schedule for the remediation projects. And the changes are allowed to that schedule. Obviously, things change in the field and need to change, but only with cause, and we're requesting, the rule requests 14-day advance notice. So we want to know the major phases of your project, and when you're doing your significant investigation, when you're doing your remediation excavations, things like that, when you're installing a treatment system, what your monitoring schedule is, whether you're monitoring in the first month of a quarter or the third month of a quarter. And then, you know, when you're looking to have your remediation project completed and your reclamation commenced and completed. So we're kind of looking for that whole start to finish of your project. We want you to be thinking about that from the start of your project. 913E establishes a quarterly reporting schedule for all remediation projects, unless an alternative is approved by the director. So this does include ongoing remediation projects if there was no prior approval of a alternate reporting schedule. And, you know, on some of those, that'll just be a simple Form 27 submittal that just, you know, bumps an update to staff. On others, that will be a quarterly monitoring report, you know, with significant details, you know, and on others, hopefully we will start seeing more of those come in that do request closure on the sites. The quarterly reporting will, you know, is another tool to encourage, you know, active remediation and getting these things cleaned up and not lingering out there for long periods of time. Next slide, please. So for ongoing remediation projects, this is an important timing date, and it is coming up. So this is remediation projects that were approved prior to January 15th, 2021. The rule requires that you submit a supplemental Form 27 with a detailed project summary and status. And in this Form 27, you can establish a reporting schedule. Again, quarterly is the default. This first update is required by April 15th, 2021. So that's kind of right around the corner. The current Form 27 does, you know, will accommodate these submittals. Although I will say we are still working on the an updated Form 27, but for now, just continue to use the eForm 27 as you have been. Next slide, please. So the closure standards, the concentrations for soil and groundwater, you know, as John was just talking about, I just want to address the provision in Rule 915F that talks about, again, remediation projects in process. This rule does allow for remediation projects or open spills that will be transferred to remediation projects to be closed under table 910-1 standards, the prior standards, if you're able to achieve those standards at your site by January 15th, 2022. So it allows a year of either closure monitoring or if the remediation was basically done, it allows a year of closure monitoring. Or if it's a small site or at the tail end of its remediation, you can get that done by January 15th, 2022. So you do need to affirmatively request for that closure standard to apply. So in your April 15th, 2021 Form 27, do include the request that you are expecting to be able to close that under table 910-1 by January 15th, 2022. And if not, then the closure standards are those that are listed in the concentrations that are listed in table 915-1. And next slide, please. So I just want to provide some information. We staff, COGCC, we are aware that this is a lot of work. What I've just lined out for you is a lot of work for both operators and staff. These stats are as of the end of January, so they're a month out of date. Sorry about that. But there's over 800 total open spills and over 1,400 total open remediation projects. So it is a big lift to get all of that properly reported by April 15th, 2021. Some tips on finding yours. Use the Colorado Oil and Gas Information System, or COGCC facility inquiry. Use the COGCC inspection incident inquiry. And also the Form 9 tools that we just released are a good way to search for your projects associated with your assets as well. In the facility inquiry, the top one on this list, please note that the spills only date back to those that were submitted on an E-Form 19 initially. So they only go back to 2014. Many of the spills predate that. So that's where you have to dig into that inspection or incident inquiry. And using that tool, you can find the older spills, and you can also find your remediation projects. You can search by your project number. I also put a note here, don't forget predecessor operator numbers. If you acquired an asset and there was an open spill or open remediation, our expectation is that you will be completing the work to clean those up and achieve closure on those. So don't forget to search by predecessor operator numbers for those open spills that were part of the asset transfer, but maybe didn't get transferred by name during the transfer. And next slide, please. This just shows this remediation heat map shows where those active remediation projects are by state or across the state, and it's broken down into the regional environmental protection specialists area. So, another resource obviously is to contact the environmental protection specialist if you're having trouble making things add up when you're searching those other tools. You can see obviously that the highest concentration of remediation projects is where we have the highest concentration of wells and oil and gas activity. They're in the central part of the DJ Basin. And then also just to note the age of remediation projects, there's 350 are less than 1 year old. So, but there's also 220 or so that are over 10 years old. We really want to get those old ones closed out. Maybe they're just missing paperwork. Maybe they have a little bit more work to do. Maybe there's one more round of sampling that will close them out. So we do want to get those updated and closed. And that's really the goal of all of this, is to look at that as a environmental liability across the state, and how can we close that out. Next slide, please. I think that's it. That is it. And I see a ton of questions have come in, so we appreciate that. We'll circle back and be answering those questions at the end. And I will hand it over back to Hannah, or over to Scott.
Great job, Greg. Thank you so much for that. Yes, up next is Scott Cuthbertson with the Form 9. And I'm going to share the website. There we go. Almost.
Yes. So thanks, Greg and John. Those were great presentations. I'm just wanting to sort of update everybody. We have released the Form 9. Hannah's going to navigate to the forms tools that Greg alluded to. So it's regulation forms, then Form 9, click on the transfer of operatorship. And that very first tool in the data templates, the Form 9 transfer of operations tools, sorry. So this is where you would go to find all the related items, facilities, locations, wells, etc., that are associated with assets that are being transferred. And so for those of you who are preparing remember there's two Form 9s. There's a Form 9 intent that is completed by the seller and lists all of the assets that the seller has that are being, and whether they're being transferred or not being transferred. And so when you use these tools, we tried to help sort of disclose all the information that we have in our records, but that may not be readily viewable in the normal COGCC search tool that Greg was alluding to. And so my recommendation to sellers is that as you use these tools, whatever it is that shows up, address it in your Form 9 intent. Even if that address is, hey, your information is wrong. This is out of date. You've got the wrong understanding of what this thing is. It was closed, right? This pit was closed, and here's the documentation for it, right? We will go by, our review of your Form 9 will go by what we find in this tool. And if you don't address it in your Form 9 intent, we'll just have to ask you about it after you submit the Form 9 intent. So the best way for your Form 9 to be processed effectively and quickly is to know that this is the information that we're going to look for in your Form 9 intent. And so you will be well served by addressing it in your submittal rather than letting it go through our intake process and then go through a review and then someone say, hey, you missed these 3 things. They're right here on this tool. What are you going to do with these 3 things? And that slows everything down, as you know. So that's my recommendation. Use these tools, address whatever it is that you find, even if you believe that the information is incorrect in our records, address that. Say this is not correct, or whatever you think the correct response is. So the other thing I would like to show you, if you'll go to the SB 19181 mission change site, Hannah. So we have updated the question portal tool, the ask a question button. If you'll click on that, Hannah, and then scroll down to the question categories and click on the drop down next to choose. You'll see at the very bottom, we have added a category of questions for transfer of operatorship Form 9. So if you have a specific question for that, now that it's out there, you can submit it specifically, not using the other or the permitting process. You've got a specific Form 9 topic here that you can submit your questions under. The last comment I'll make, and I'm through with the website, Hannah, you can go to wherever you want to go to, is to remind everybody that if there was a Form 10 submitted before January 15th, then that Form 10 is in the process of being, it's in process, right? It will be processed, and a Form 9 is not required for those transfers. Appreciate that, we had a slug of those, and staff is working through those as quickly as possible. And so that's how we're addressing those transfers that happened before January 15th. And then that's all I had.
Great. Thank you, Scott. All right, guys. Next up are questions. And Greg, would you like me to just read the questions out loud? It looks like you may have responded to one or maybe more of them.
Well, yeah, Hannah, why don't you, well, I actually kind of lumped a couple questions there together. So maybe I'll read the first one that kind of covers a couple.
Okay.
And respond to that. So this is the question about the Form 42s and the speed of submittal. What is being done to speed up the system when submitting Form 42s? What is being done to make the system more stable? It seems to go down most afternoons or get too slow to efficiently work. And it's not specifically one document. It's kind of all of them. When we're submitting them for liquids unloading, they take approximately 8 to 10 minutes each. So we do believe that this is probably a volume issue, and nothing is currently being done about this because we didn't realize this was an issue. So we did look into the volume of Form 42s that we're receiving. We've had about 1,500 forms submitted by 3 operators alone. Those are the top 3 submitters. So obviously that's a huge volume on the system. We think that's probably what's slowing it down. I would suggest in the meantime, while we look into it, try kind of the I-70 solution, right? Like try off-peak hours. And I know that doesn't work on I-70 either, but for some people, they're able to do that. So if you are able to do, some of those submittals off-peak hours, please try and do so. That might help us. And so then, Hannah, I think that covers all of those Form 42 questions that maybe were intermixed there.
Okay, I'll try to keep up.
Okay.
First question. I have a question regarding Rule 303E1, capital H, lowercase I, which requires notification to the administrator for any public water system that operates a surface water public water system intake that is 15 stream miles or less downstream from the proposed working pad surface. I'm wondering how we are able to find the public water system intake points. They don't seem to be on COGCC. Are they soon to be added to COGCC, or is there another way to get these data / these locations in order to know if an operator meets this notification requirement?
Thanks, I'll take that question. So for security reasons, the surface water intakes for public water systems are not mapped on the COGCC GIS online interactive map. You can use the classified water segments, which are provided for the 317B, the former Rule 317B and current Rule 411 requirements to approximate the location of the intakes. Obviously, it's at the downstream point of those mapped areas. The 317B buffers are what we are currently still using to establish the 411 buffers. We recognize that it's not perfect, but the mapping is just not complete to update that. So the classified water segments that are shown on the 317B map layers are 5 miles upstream from the intake. So you can measure upstream 10 miles from that, from the upper reaches of that, or you can measure downstream from your site to see if you encounter the upper end of a classified water segment. you can do that measurement using any GIS tool, or you can even point click along it using Google Earth. When we're talking about that 10 and 5 mile upstream, 10 mile beyond that, using that type of tool is going to give you decent enough accuracy. If you wind up being very close to the applicability of the rule, then you might want to use a more precise measuring tool.
All right, thank you, Greg. The next question is, will operators be required to install borings or monitoring wells to determine depth to water in every case to demonstrate the groundwater Ssls are or are not appropriate? What dilution attenuation factor, DAF, was used to determine? Yes.
Let me jump in. I'll take the first one, and then we'll move on to the dilution factor one.
Sure thing, thanks.
And that's a great question regarding the installation of soil borings. So they will not always be required. And in many cases, if you have shallow impacts that are removed by excavation and confirmation samples are collected that demonstrate compliance, you wouldn't necessarily have to try to drill a monitoring well down to groundwater every single time. So it'll depend on the site specifics of each spill and release. And then, sorry about that, Hannah. There was a question about the dilution attenuation factor, which one was used to determine the groundwater soil screening levels. And I'm told a dilution factor of 1 was used. And we've tried to point out that we didn't create these soil screening levels. We adopted, in coordination, basically what CDPHE Hazardous Materials Waste Management Division uses. But for more information, there's a ton of information on the EPA regional screening level pages that we have some links to in that presentation if you want more information on that.
Great, thanks, John. Next question, how will baseline soil or water data be incorporated into the analysis?
And I'm not quite sure what's meant, but if you do have some baseline, say, soil characterization, and maybe where site-specific depth to groundwater is on your location, you could definitely provide that information within the Form 27 to help inform our decision on which soil screening levels are going to be appropriate.
Thank you. Next question is, are historic static water levels in nearby groundwater well completion reports sufficient to justify using residential standards on a release or facility closure?
Another good question, but not really. And the reason I say that is because water wells are constructed for a different purpose. A lot of times, when they're drilling those, they might hit a saturated interval that doesn't create quite enough water volume for the well, so they'll continue to drill. So water well information can be informative, but it doesn't always tell us exactly where the uppermost saturated zone is. So you could definitely use it to help guide you. I mean, if you have a domestic water well nearby that's completed in shallow alluvium and you're very close to it and the groundwater's indicated at 20 feet, that might help inform you what's happening at your site.
Great, thanks, John. Next question is, for spills that are less than 90 days old, do we need to have a supplemental 19 or 27 field filed by April 15th of 2001? Fieldwork schedules frequently change due to weather conditions. How would COGCC staff like operators to address this now that 14-day notice is required before conducting work?
Okay, yeah, so for the spills that are less than 90 days old, so the new rule requires that either a supplemental 19 with closure information or a 27 be filed within the 90-day window. So if you've had a spill after January 15th of this year, you would want to get the supplemental 19 or 27 in within 90 days from the spill discovery date to comply with the new rule. And then the second one regarding schedules frequently change in the 14-day notice for the implementation schedule. A couple ways to answer this, but you would want to notify the area environmental protection specialist as soon as possible and request the schedule change on a supplemental Form 27 as soon as possible. We do understand, like, if a severe winter storm hit and it delayed your field work, you know, we understand that might happen. The implementation schedule really is also on a bigger remediation project, kind of a long-term schedule. A lot of times those might not be down to the exact day where you're going to hit the field, but the more precise they are, the better.
All right, thank you, John. Next question is, will the updated Form 27 address the difference between closures or quarterly updates so that the COGCC staff can prioritize and meet the 30-day estimated approval? Further, can there be a checkbox or selection to address partial facility closures?
Yes, so regarding closures versus quarterly updates, we already prioritize between those things. So if an operator submits several closure Form 27s, you know, we're aware of that. We obviously review the Form 27. We can see that they're requesting or they're submitting a work plan for facility closure, and say we have a batch of monitoring reports that are sent in for quarterly updates. So our staff's already trying to prioritize between those things. Again, our goal is never to hold up anybody that's planned field work. And again, I don't think the 30-day time frame has even been, I think we've exceeded that since the new rules have come into effect.
All right, thanks, John. The
Yep.
next question is, can you clarify what the requirement is for the submittal of a Form 27 for existing projects? Is it 27 required for every project or only those that have not had a supplemental 27 filed since the initial? I am particularly thinking about existing projects that have already been filing quarterly 27s. Do we need to file an off-cycle 27 just to address this requirement?
So strictly speaking, to comply with the rule, existing projects do need to meet the requirements. So it's possible you would have to file an off-cycle one. If a supplemental hasn't been filed within the quarter since the rule came into effect, you should submit an update, and you could at that time check to determine with the EPS if another reporting schedule is appropriate.
Thank you. And the next question is, how do you recommend determining depth to groundwater if unknown?
So each site is going to vary a little bit, but again, you're going to use all types of information. And so you might have surrounding domestic water well information that can inform the decision. When you're delineating the extent, you might end up just chasing impacts down to the groundwater table. That happens quite often. So it's really going to be done on a site-by-site basis.
All right, thank you. And the last question right now is, on table 915, the benzopyrene values for groundwater protection, and in parentheses is 0.24 mgs, are higher than the residential soil value, and in parentheses 0.11 mg/kg. Is this accurate?
Yes.
Thank you. And The next question is just to clarify further on what John said, a Form 27 is required by April 15th for any existing remediation project that has not otherwise had a Form 27 filed within the first quarter of 2021.
Correct.
Awesome. Well, that is all the questions, but we'll just give it a minute for other people to put in questions if they have them. Oh, there we go. Here's the information for the next operator meeting next Tuesday, March 9th. And if you need to be added to the operator email list, you can email me at that email address right there. Make sure you get my last name right. If you misspell it, it's not going to get to me. And I'll check my spam folder to see if I've missed anybody lately. Sorry to those who got spam foldered. And you should check your spam folder too if you're not receiving emails, because sometimes our emails go to those because we're using Constant Contact, which also does lots of sales flyers. So lots of spam filters catch those.
Hannah, there was a sort of a subpart to a question earlier about the Form 27 requesting a checkbox or selection to address partial facility closures. And I just wanted to address that. We will consider that with our Form 27 update. So thanks to whoever asked that question. Sorry, we missed that in there.
Great. Thank you, Greg. I'll give it till 9:55 if there's no more questions by 9:55. So that gives us 4 more minutes to put questions in, folks.
I think we're going to need hold music. And nobody had any hard questions for Scott? Where's the Form 9 question?
Hey, he's up on the bus.
So that got us through 1 minute. Good job, Greg.
Thanks. There's 168 people actively listening. When will the new Form 27 be rolled out? That is a great question. We are working with our developers. As you know, our development team is taxed with a lot of work. They are working on the Form 2B right now. And then I believe following that, Scott, you can check me on this, but is the Form 19 and the Form 27?
Oh, I have forgotten the lineup, but yeah, I believe that's right.
And so the follow-up question to that is, should we also expect a new Form 19? And yes, we will be updating the Form 19 as well. It will include the information on the new, I believe there'll be checkboxes for the new requirements for spill reporting that were added to Rule 905, I believe.
So the official triage priority for form work is the 2B, which is in user accepted testing right now. Any Form 9 bugs that we find, we've rolled out Form 9. The Form 6 has an OGLA task that we felt like was needed pretty quickly. There's a small change to Form 26 that engineering needs to accommodate. And then it's 19, 27, 15, 43, and then all the UIC forms. That's what's left in our to-do list, which is significant.
Thanks for that update, Scott. We've had a couple questions come in and then we just got another one, so let's go. The first one is, so for facility closure where the assumption is the site is clean and there are no nearby groundwater wells and depth to groundwater is unknown, which soil standards do we default to?
Yeah, good question. So if it's a facility closure and you're not aware of a release or any kind of an impact, You're going to do your facility closure investigation. If you don't find any impacts and there hasn't been a release, then you're always going to default to the groundwater soil screening levels. But if there hasn't been an impact, then those won't be exceeded and you'll be able to get closure.
Thanks, John. The next question is, do the various guidance checklists need to be included with the Form 27 submittals in order to achieve closure? What if they are not able to be entirely completed?
Yeah, so I assume you're talking about the checklist examples that we provided in the facility closure guidance. And again, those are meant to be field forms and tools to help document closure in the field. Yes, we would like to see that documentation with the Form 27s, and it can take different forms. So again, you could use a all-encompassing field form like that, or you might have separate forms. You might have field screening logs, and just logs for observations. So the answer is yes, we want to see the field documentation, but it can be presented in different forms, and it should come in on the Form 20 with the Form 27.
Okay, thanks, John. And surprise, I got a question privately, so I'll read that one out. The Form 27 requires the USCS classification for general soil type. The data on COGCC is limited to NRCS soil classification. What is staff's expectation for correlating the two similar but unique classification systems? Where is the best place to find USCS online map?
All right, so yeah, we would like to see the unified soil classification system used when describing the lithology at a site. And that's different than the soil types that are on the website. So you're not going to find generally mapped soil types because soil types vary from site to site. So in this case, you need to have a qualified environmental technician who's experienced in describing and logging soil. And they need to use like I said, the unified soil classification system as a guide. And it has more to do with, soil permeability and characteristics that affect remediation basically, and how contaminants move through the subsurface.
Thank you, John. We've had one more come in. On the forms left to develop per Scott, when do you think all of what will be finished and did I read that right? When do you think all of that will be finished? And is that going to cause any issue with getting those forms in the new technology before Silverlight goes away by August 17th?
So, I mean, obviously, we have a significant task. We do think that we are going to be able to accomplish the operator's needs as they come in. Some of these forms, I think the Form 9 was the last critical form that we had. The rest is just now trying to upgrade the efficiency at which you can give us information and the effectiveness at which we can review information. So I don't think there's anything left to do that is, that prevents operators from doing what they need to get done. We will just continue to improve that communication process as we update and change these forms. And yes, the development plan is as soon as we are able to finish the mission change rule implementation changes in the forms, we will be trying to switch from Silverlight to our web forms, which are being developed in tandem as we proceed in the changes to the e-forms. So yes, I do think that we'll meet that goal. it's a have to meet goal, as you know, Dave. So I do think that we'll be successful there.
Thank you, Scott. The next question is, with all of the changes / updates to Form 19s and Form 27s, will the spill / remediation metrics be updated on the dashboard?
Greg, I might need some help, but so I don't think we have any Form 27 data on that dashboard. And we'll continue to update the spill information the way we currently have it, but Greg might have some more information on that.
Yeah, Mike, I'm assuming you're referring to the daily activity dashboard. And if so, I mean, we will continue to report, you know, those spills on the dashboard as we have been. You know, I don't believe those are, you know, sort of reported by type on the daily activity dashboard.
All right, thank you.
And Hannah, I think there was another question about soil types.
Ah, dang, did I miss it? Sorry. Yes. Further to the soil type question, if the Form 27 is required 30 days prior to the work on location, are you requiring an extra operator trip out there to assess the soil? Sorry about that, Christine.
So no, we're not requiring that. If you're talking about the initial Form 27 for facility closure. And so your initial Form 27 is basically telling us what your plan is to close the facility. And then when you go out to do the investigation during facility closure is when you make the observations on soil conditions and any spills or releases or impacts. So that information gets reported on a supplemental.
Thanks, John. And the next question that came in is, has there been any progress made on integrating historic spills pre-E-form submittal into the E-form 19 document submittals?
I'll grab that one. We're looking into that. I'm not sure, you know, again, with the workload of building requirements for the mission change, I'm not sure that one got bumped up to the top. If an active, one of those old active spills, you know, is going to need to transfer to a remediation project to Form 27 anyway, and we can work through the closure process with you on the Form 19. So hopefully we can whittle the world of affected projects down on that.
Thanks, Greg. All right, there are no more questions right now, but if you have questions while we're not having this lovely meeting, then you can go to our website, go to SB 19-181, over here to mission change guidance, and then you can ask your question on this portal that we showed you earlier with Scott. You can choose your topic of question, which will be helpful for us to decide who is going to answer it. Oh, looks like there's another question that came in. When will staff issue guidance on the Rule 905 waste management plan contents?
That should come out fairly soon. We have a draft completed and we're just trying to finalize the document. So I would hope by the end of the month.
Great, thanks, John. I didn't miss any others. Okay. All right, there's how to submit your questions. And then I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you everyone for coming to the meeting and asking all of your great questions. We appreciate those. The next operator training is Tuesday, March 9th. That's just next Tuesday. When will this training be posted? We put them up as soon as we can. Sometimes it's within 24 hours. Last week I had to edit out a portion where I displayed all of my passwords to you guys. So that took a little bit longer, but we do try to get them up within 24 hours. They definitely are up by the end of the week. but I can't really make any promises as far as timing because weird things happen. Oh, also sometimes YouTube just decides not to let us upload and we have to scrap the whole thing, try it again. So it's real fun, but we do get those up as soon as possible. Thank you for asking that question. And then if you need to be added to the operator email list, please email me at my state email and I will put you on the list. And otherwise, I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Take care. Oh, that's me.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, everyone.
Sure thing, guys.